Did you know you could be breaking the law just by naming your child? Most Americans think they live in the land of free, but many states have laws that tell you what you can and can't name your kids. That's not true for me because I live in Kentucky, where there are no rules about it. But what about you? If you have a newborn or you're planning baby names, you might be one step away from breaking the law. I mean, it's crazy. I know what you're thinking. How could there be rules about naming your child? Hey, musician Frank Zappa named his son Dweezil and his daughter Moon Unit. If you can get away with that, you can get away with anything, right? On this episode of Hammer's Law, we're going to find out if Rose, by any other name, would get you sent to court. That's right, there's actually rules for what you can name someone, and the rules are different all over the world. Even in the United States, different states have different rules, except my beloved home state of Kentucky, where you can do whatever you want. So if you really want to go crazy with your kid's name, move here and no one will stand in your way. But that's not true everywhere. Some names are illegal, and there are some things you can't include in a name. There are also crazy ways that people take advantage of the system, not to mention the laws about changing your name. But let's start at the beginning. When babies come into this world, they need names, and I mean it. They are required to have names. In Florida, if the parents don't agree on a name for their child, they have to work it out or the court will choose one. So if you don't come up with something, a judge in the state of Florida is going to decide for you. It's also a law in most states that you need to have two names, a first one and a last one. This just makes logical sense. I mean, there's only one Cher and only one Beyonce, but what happens when there are two of them? Who wants to be called Beyonce 2? And that's actually where last names come from in the first place. They were designed to differentiate people, usually based on their profession. For instance, thousands of years ago in a village, there might be two guys named John. That can get confusing, so they started calling them by their names and their professions. One John was a blacksmith, and the other one was a leather tanner. They became John the Smith or John the Tanner. After a long period of time, they just became John Smith and John Tanner. That's why we use two names, so the government can tell people apart. Of course, then there are people who name their kids after themselves. I named my son Darryl Isaacs Jr., but he doesn't go by Darryl, he goes by Lee. I can't get in trouble for giving him my name because there is a long tradition passing down names from father to son. The way you tell us apart is by adding Junior or the third after the name. But what about Lee? Is he going to get in trouble for going by Lee, even though that's not his legal name? Hey, pay attention, Lee, because I'll be covering this in just a minute. But first, I want to get back to the laws about what you can and can't name your child. Some of the laws are just common sense rules that relate to being able to write or pronounce the names. For instance, one that most people don't think about is the number of characters you can have in a name. Some places like Kentucky, my beloved lawless Wild West state, have no limitations. In Florida, if you run out of spaces on the birth certificate, you just flip it over and write the rest on the back. It's legally binding. Other places, however, do have restrictions because of things like computer systems limitations. Like Massachusetts, where you only have 40 characters for a first, middle, and last name. So check your states to find out what your character limits are. Another limitation many states put in place is the use of characters that are not letters. This can include a lot of things. An exclamation point at the end of a name, or replacing the A in a name with the @ symbol. Some people even want to put numbers in a name. Many states say that's a no-no, and that makes sense. How would you pronounce the name Larry if it had an @ symbol instead of an A? What if the name George had a 0 in place of the letter O? I'll be honest though, I like the idea of having an exclamation point at the end of my name. That way, instead of just being called Darryl, everyone would have to say Darryl exclamation. But honestly, punctuation is just confusing in a name. That is why things like asterisks and apostrophes are not allowed. You also can't use pictograms in a name. This includes small images like emojis. So if you're hoping to name your kid after the emoji of the praying hands or the winking smiley face, I have bad news for you. You also can't use letters from a foreign language. Some languages use the same letters as English, but many don't. Russia uses the Cyrillic alphabet. There are separate Arabic, Greek, and Hebrew alphabets, and so many more. Since those letters don't have a specific use or meaning in English, you can't use them in a name. But most of the laws exist because of issues with how to say or write those names. But there are other laws that prevent the use of certain words or kinds of words from being names. I bet you can guess what some of them are. The first category is basically just offensive words, derogatory terms, obscenity, vulgar language, and other words that are considered offensive. I'm not going to say any of them because they will get bleeped out anyway, but I bet you could pretty easily find a list of those on the internet. The second category is names of specific people that have been banned. You can't name your kid after someone known for committing crimes like genocide. Adolf Hitler is a name that has been banned from use in some places. In some states, you're also not allowed to name your child Jesus Christ. This could be for two reasons. It could be because you can't name yourself after Jesus. It could also be that they consider it to be obscenity, since some people use it as a phrase in a place of a swear word. It could be either way, so they decide to avoid the problem entirely. So those are the rules about naming. But what about renaming? What if you want to change your name and go by something else? Well, you might be surprised by the laws about that too. Let's go back to my son, Darryl Isaacs Jr. He goes by Lee, but he's never going to get in trouble for that, even though it's not his legal name. Congratulations, Lee, you've dodged that bullet. The reason he won't get in trouble is because of two things. The first is what we call the preferred name. When you fill out paperwork for a doctor or a job application, you'll see a place for a legal name and another for a preferred name. Many places extend the option of using a preferred name. Lee has the option, and it's perfectly legal. The second is because in many states, you can change your name using what they call the usage method. That just means you use a name frequently and publicly as your name, and it's generally accepted by common law. You only get in trouble if you're doing it to commit fraud, dodge your debts, or impersonate someone. But if you're looking to legally and officially change your name, there are several reasons to do it. The first one is marriage. In the United States, many women adopt their husband's last name when they get married. That is a generally accepted reason across the whole country, which brings up the second reason, divorce. If you took someone's name when you got married, you should be able to switch back when you're not married anymore, right? Another reason for family name changes is adoption. When a child is adopted by parents, they can have their last names changed to be part of their new family. Some people want to change their name to simplify it or make it work better for them. For example, someone might have a last name pronounced France, but it's spelled Franz. Most people would pronounce that wrong, so they might change the spelling to make it easier. There's one group of people who use name changing a lot, and that group is actors. Most of the time, they change their name because they want something cooler than their birth name. For example, Susan Weaver's an okay name, but it's not as cool as Sigourney Weaver. And Marion Morrison sounds all right, but it doesn't sound like an all-inspiring, cool cowboy name. But you know what does? John Wayne. That's the main reason actors change their names. But it's not the only one. Another reason is to differentiate themselves from other performers with the same name. Have you ever wondered why Samuel L. Jackson uses his middle initial? It's because when he started acting, there was another Samuel Jackson that acted. He needed to set himself apart. He's now the most famous Samuel Jackson, but he has been Samuel L. Jackson for so long that it doesn't make sense to switch back. One of the most interesting reasons for a name change has to do with religious faith. Many religions involve the option to choose a new name as part of your faith. Buddhists and Hindus adopt what is called Dharma name. Catholic nuns are given a new name when they join a convent. Converts to the Islamic faith have the choice of a new name if they wish. The most famous celebrity example is Kentucky hero Cassius Clay. He changed his name to Muhammad Ali. And of course, every time someone becomes the Pope, they get a new name too. Those are the positive reasons to change your name. But not all reasons to change your name are good ones. Some people auction off their new name to the highest bidder. That means they have to legally change their name to whatever the winner chooses. That seems like a disaster waiting to happen. Some people change their names to avoid stalking and harassment, to keep themselves and loved ones safe. There is also a long history of people changing ethnic last names to avoid bigotry and violence. Of course, there's the name change you get when you go into a witness protection too. That happens when you have important information about a crime that puts your life in danger. I hope this is one type of name change that none of you end up dealing with. There is also the name changes that aren't even voluntary. Many immigrants who came to America in the 1800s and early 1900s had their names changed. Government officials found their names too difficult to spell, pronounce, and remember. Often, the changes to the names were not the immigrants' choice. The changes made it difficult for later generations to trace their family's lineage. Thankfully, immigrants have an option to change their name now, but it's not required. The most controversial example of forced name changing in American history was in 1887. The federal government created the Dawes Act. It required all Native Americans to adopt a last name. The use of last names was not an aspect of Native culture, but it was forced on them for many questionable reasons. One reason was it allowed the government to break up native land ownerships. Then they could take the land away from them and keep it for themselves. It's hard to believe that something as devastating as losing their homeland came from something as simple as a name change. These stories and laws illustrate the surprising amount of power that we connect to our names. Everyone from actors to religious figures are all affected by this. It's amazing to think that a basketball player like Ron Artest could be moved to change his name to Meta World Peace in an attempt to have a positive impact. And across the world in New Zealand, a man could lose a bet and be required to change his name to Full Metal Havoc, more sexy and intelligent than Spock and all the superheroes combined with Frosted Nova. What a fascinating world we live in. I hope you enjoyed this trip through the laws of naming. If you like and comment, I'll make a sequel dedicated to the craziest real cases of illegal names that went to court. Thanks for watching Hammer's Law, and be sure to subscribe for more fun and informative legal content.